society in general understands you have to spend on your defense because people understand that Ukraine is fighting for Latvia, for Europe, for NATO. So Latvia is going to spend more and more in defense. And there's simply no other way.
There is maybe a temptation to think that, well, these are small states, it's not so important. But what the Western audiences and also particularly American audiences have to understand that it will not be just one chunk that Russia would take away from NATO. It will go like a cancer further.
2022 gave us a window of opportunity. Investment in hard infrastructure, shelters, and material reserves. That's one side of the coin. And the other thing that we've been working on very systematically these recent years is investing in the resilience of people's mind and their preparedness and readiness for emergency situations.
Welcome back to The Ties That Bind, NATO Allies in Action. I'm Natalia Kapitnik, the Communications Director at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, and this season on The Ties That Bind, we are taking a deeper look at how individual member countries on the front line contribute and collaborate within the alliance. How are frontline states investing in and planning for their defense? How are they thinking about their role and contributions in the alliance and on the world stage? How have their historical experiences shaped how their governments and societies think about defense, countering disinformation, and their changing economic realities? And how are they preparing for a potential conflict with Russia? This week, we go back north to the shores of the Baltic Sea for the perspective from Latvia. In this episode, we'll hear from 3 Latvian experts about the evolution of the country's defense posture, cooperation within NATO, and its response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We'll also hear about what's happening on the domestic front with the evolution of national and municipal civilian defense programs, Latvia's infrastructure investments, and how the country's public sector is thinking about resilience and building trust in a whole-of-society defense approach. Thanks for joining us. Now, unlike most of my other conversations that are all recorded virtually, I was actually lucky enough to be in Riga in October and recorded a few of these interviews there on site. So to help set the scene about Latvia's current security posture and evolving role in NATO, as well as its contributions to Ukraine's war effort, I spoke with Dr. Mears Anzans, Director of the Center for Geopolitical Studies in Riga. Mears, thank you so much for joining me today on The Ties That Bind and for welcoming us into your office in beautiful Old City Riga.
Yes, thanks for coming down. Looking forward to our conversation.
So I think for starters, we kind of have to set the scene, right? Because we are in Riga today, as I mentioned. It's only about 300 kilometers from the Russian border. Feels like there's nowhere else that the generational contest between Russia and the West plays out more than in the Baltic states, kind of on every level. And I think the events that have been happening in the skies over Europe in the last few weeks have really only heightened that awareness, right? But of course, it feels like Latvians have been acutely aware of these threats and have been preparing for them for a long time. So you wrote actually about Latvia's experience with the drone incursion last year for FPRI. We can link that in the show notes. But as you pointed out, the Russian drones and missiles entering NATO territory, it's not really an extraordinary event anymore. But certainly this last month has really felt like a shift in the response, especially from NATO. So could you tell us a little bit about what the Latvian kind of sentiment response has been to this evolving security situation after all these suspicious drone sightings at airports, after the drone incursions in Poland, Romania, the airspace violations in Estonia? Is this a sense that this is kind of business as usual in this part of the world, or is there a sense that things are escalating? And do we perhaps feel like Latvians are confident in their own defense and NATO defense capabilities in light of all of this?
Well, many questions in one. So maybe for context, Latvia gained independence in 1991. And basically since then, relations with Russia have been quite complicated. So Russia withdrew its armed forces only in 1994. Then Latvia quickly did everything it can to join NATO. We joined NATO in 2004. And, over the 3 decades and a bit more, we've seen many interactions with Russians. And obviously, war in Ukraine 2022, it was a large geopolitical shock for Latvia and Latvians. It was not only about the elites, but about the entire society, because many thought that Russia would invade also the Baltic states, because, during the first weeks of the war, it appeared that Ukraine might fall. So that thankfully didn't happen, but people obviously have their fears here. So 2022, it was especially tough. So many people were worried. Many prepared so-called emergency bags, just in case you had to leave. So you had some, basic things with you, to survive without electricity, so forth. And yeah, the 3.5 years have been quite complex here. So Russia has increased the level of its subkinetic activities. Well, we have seen, drone incursions. One drone, the Shahed 136 type drone, landed in Latgale in eastern Latvia with explosives, so nobody was hurt. So then we have seen various arson attacks here. Russia's Shadow Fleet has cut communication and natural gas and electricity cables on the seabed of the Baltic Sea, and drones and then also fighter jets have violated Baltic airspace, and also in conjunction with Belarus. Russia has launched a weaponization migration operation. So basically, they are inviting migrants from Middle East and other regions to Belarus and Russia, and then they are guiding them towards Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. And this also has created quite a dilemma for the Baltic states and Poland.
When Russia seized Crimea in 2014, I think that really prompted NATO to think more about sending rotational units into the Baltic states more than before. And obviously, I believe it was last year that Latvia became the first country to kind of scale up its NATO forward presence with the multinational brigade. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of what role this multinational brigade in Latvia has played in terms of NATO operations and thinking about Latvia's own defense strategy?
Oh, yeah. And the arrival of NATO's multinational battle group in 2017, it was a game changer. As Latvia joined NATO in 2004, then, basically Latvia became a NATO member state only on paper, because there was the Baltic Air Patrol mission. So you usually had 4 fighter jets flying out of Lithuania and policing the skies of the Baltic states, since neither Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania have fighter jets. So they don't, and probably they won't have in for foreseeable future. So basically we had the only Baltic air policing mission. When Russia occupied Crimea and started the war in eastern Ukraine, so that was also alarm. Well, and then the United States sent company-sized units in spring 2014 to each of the Baltic states and also Poland. So that was basically the first time when rotational but sort of permanent presence by NATO allies was ensured in the Baltic states. So before we had only 4 fighter jets, which was almost nothing. Not bad, but almost nothing. So, and in 2017, we received the Canadian led battle group. At first, it was a battalion-sized unit, but following Madrid summit of NATO 2022, it was scaled up to a entire brigade. So a brigade is obviously a lot better than a battalion, but it's still not sufficient. And currently the brigade, the numbers, they fluctuate because there are more than a dozen of nations. So Canadians lead it, and we have Spanish, Danish, Swedish soldiers, and many other nations. And the numbers fluctuate, but basically it's one brigade. And this is really crucial that we have NATO allies here, boots on the ground. So first and foremost, it's about deterrence, so that Russia took this seriously, because obviously if there are no allied troops and the Baltic states are not among the strongest NATO allies, we have basically no effective air force. We have helicopters, transport aircraft. Only Lithuania has a medium-range air defense system. It's crucial that we have these allies here. And apart from the NATO multinational battle group, we also have Americans rotating here in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. So this is really, really crucial, because had we not joined NATO, who knows, maybe we would have been, in place of Ukraine, or we were like second Belarus here.
I think one of the most impressive things for me when thinking about Latvia has always been its aid to Ukraine. And kind of one always hears about the quote unquote small Baltic states. But actually, when thinking about Latvia's aid to Ukraine over the past few years, proportionally, it is not small at all by any means. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in 2022, Latvia donated almost 1% of its GDP towards aid to Ukraine and has been kind of giving at similar levels since then. Of course, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland also very much in that camp. But at the same time, I feel like while there's this growing American kind of ambivalence towards Europe, right? We see it in the statements of President Trump. We've seen the flip-flopping on kind of how he's talked about the war in Ukraine. America was giving aid to Ukraine. Now, President Trump says that America is willing to sell but not donate weapons to Ukraine. And obviously, the elephant in the room here is America, richest country in the world, saying it will sell, but it will not donate. Whereas Latvia, a so-called small country, giving, a sizable chunk of its GDP to Ukraine. And just for context, because I had to look this up because I knew it was going to be a big difference. Latvia's GDP about $43.5 billion, whereas America, $30 trillion. So the scale there, right? The question of the scale. So I guess my question is, has this shift in America's approach to how has it been perceived domestically? Is it, okay, well, at least they're still going to sell us the weapons, right, and the systems? Or is it more like, what's going on here, guys? And then I guess as a follow-up, are Latvia's financial commitments to its defense, to supporting Ukraine, I mean, the plans to raise defense spending to 5% over the next few years, are they sustainable going forward into the next decade?
Well, so when it comes to Latvia's defense, Latvia has increased defense expenditure significantly. As mentioned, Latvia joined NATO in 2004, and we entered an era of euphoria. So we thought that, Russia is going to be a normal country, that it will westernize, democratize, and so forth. And Latvia basically started slacking when it comes to defense. So we didn't reach 2% for the first 14 years of being members of NATO. So Latvia reached 2% only in 2018. Latvia thought that everything's going to be right. So we have Article 5 and the allies will protect us. So Latvia was in a very bad shape in 2014. Latvia's armed forces were only around 4,500 soldiers. We spent some 220 million euros on defense only, which is less than 1%. So fast forward to 2025. So this year, Latvia spends around 1.6 billion euros, which is around 3.8% of GDP. And Latvia is inching closer to 5%. So Latvia will spend 5% soon, maybe already next year. And in our case, well, basically we have no other options. If you will not feed your army, you will feed another army, and so Latvia must spend more, and everyone understands, almost everyone, because obviously there are different voices wrong, but the society in general understands you have to spend on your defense, because people understand that Ukraine is fighting for Latvia, for Europe, for NATO, so Latvia is going to spend more and more in defense, and there's simply no other way. And when it comes to the American position, well, we have been satisfied, for 3.5 years already, because previously during the Biden administration, people criticized the United States that it is not doing enough, that it's not sending, the right equipment, that it should do more and more. And obviously, we would have been much happier if the United States had continued the course of Biden administration, because, had not Biden helped Ukraine, so who knows, where the front line would be now. And it would be, very, very complex. So that is unfortunate, obviously, that America is not donating, that it is only selling weapons to Ukraine, but at the same time, Americans are sharing intelligence, which also matters, assisting with logistics. We'll see what comes next. But President Trump is right that there is one big, beautiful ocean between the United States and Europe. And this is foremost our responsibility. So Baltic states and Poland and many others are doing their best, but overall Europe could do more. And from the other perspective, I can understand very well. I have also been in the U.S. and it's difficult to explain people somewhere in Midwest that there's a country called Ukraine and Americans have to defend it, and they have their own problems, and in that environment and similar environments, President Trump's messages, they resonate.
The last few years have shown how different threat perceptions across the alliance can be. To learn more about how Latvia is thinking about its defense concept in addressing hybrid warfare threats and other challenges, I spoke with Dr. Ieva Berdzina, a senior researcher at the Center for Security and Strategic Studies at the National Academy of Defense of Latvia and an associate professor at Vidzeme University of Applied Sciences.
How is Latvia preparing for these kinds of threats today? And what can you tell us more broadly about Latvia's comprehensive defense model?
Yeah, actually, I agree with you that Latvia and other Baltic states and also Finland, I would say that we have been among those NATO members that know Russia, that were aware of the threats Russia posed to neighboring countries and also broader NATO alliance long time ago. And actually, even before Russia illegally annexed Crimea and started hybrid warfare in southeastern Ukraine in 2014, which was an eye-opener for broader Western audiences. But for us, it was a story that we knew before that, and then it gradually escalated. And actually, in the West, we started to speak about hybrid warfare more broadly, in the context of risks posed by Russia was after this 2014 events that I already mentioned, and since that we can actually follow how the toolbox of hybrid warfare that Russia used against the West, how it expanded. Because in 2014, when we spoke about hybrid warfare, the main focus was on information environment, Russia's activities in the information environment, of course, including cyber operations. And that was our main focus. Of course, the role model was the way how they operated in Ukraine, like covert military operations. But when it concerned like NATO and EU member states, that was primarily disinformation campaigns. What actually I would add, it was construction of broader long-term strategic narratives that aimed ideologically to challenge the global dominance of the West and to prove that democracy is not the only possible model and it's not the best one. But then it gradually expanded, and what we can see nowadays is that what we call hybrid warfare, especially activities from Russia, that they have moved only from solely information environment also to physical environment. And in the context of Latvia, the first significant shift and the next level of understanding of hybrid warfare actually was after Belarus presidential elections in 2020, because a year after that, when the opposition movement was violently suppressed and Belarus was under severe sanctions from the European Union, Belarus, and we can assume, and I think with a high degree of credibility, that also it was supported by Russia, so they started to breach our borders already in 2021. It mainly concerned Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, and we saw this flow of illegal immigrants through our borders. So this expanded our understanding of hybrid threats. And the next level of tensions was after full-scale invasion in Ukraine in 2022, and especially last year and this year we see a lot of the spectrum of activities Russia is using. It's expanded, and also the intensity has grown. So indeed, this situation is escalating.
And what can you tell us about how Latvia is thinking about its security through this comprehensive kind of whole of society defense model? Can you walk us through what that encompasses?
And I would say the turning point was 2014. Because then really we saw that actually Russia may carry out activities, either we call them asymmetric or either we call them as hybrid warfare, but actually these are the ones that can do us damage, but they are under the threshold of NATO Article 5.
Right.
Yeah, and so it meant that we need to be ready for any type of scenarios and also the ones that can be carried out covertly. So it means that we needed to strengthen our self-defense capabilities. Of course, since Latvia joined NATO in 2004, in all our strategic defense policy documents, it was postulated that the cornerstone of Latvia's defense policy is collective defense. But like I said, after those events of 2014, so the way how we thought about strengthening our self-defense capabilities was the concept of comprehensive national defense, or the other name of the concept, which is very similar, is total defense. Mm-hmm. And it was a defense concept that developed during the Second World War and after that. And before the collapse of the Soviet Union, this security concept was mainly operated by countries that were non-aligned. The countries that, in case of military aggression, either smaller period of time or longer period of time, they had to be ready to defeat themselves on their own in the conflict with potential aggressors with with much stronger military power. And the typical cases of countries that base their security on the principles of total or comprehensive national defense in Europe are Switzerland, Finland, and other Nordic countries, also Austria. Yeah, and so then after Crimea annexation, so Latvia started to think about how can we complement comprehensive collective defense with principles of total or comprehensive national defense. And this is indeed a very specific situation in current circumstances, because nowadays also we have many NATO member countries that base their security on total defense principles. And for example, we see Finland has joined NATO, and Finland is one of the typical total or comprehensive national defense countries. Yeah, and so we started to develop this idea, and the implementation of the system started in 2019 when our Cabinet of Ministers adopted the conceptual document, which outlined Latvia's model of comprehensive national defense. And basically what it is a defense concept that is based on two principles, whole of government approach and whole of society approach, which means that whole of government approach, to put in simple terms, it means that national defense is not only the responsibility of Ministry of Defense, but we need to look at all major areas of societal life as essential for security, because healthcare system, internal security, financial security, diplomacy, and many more, they are essential for providing national security and state defense. So we need to look at them in a complex and comprehensive manner. And the other point, the other principle or whole of society involvement means that, as Latvia's documents put it, that state defense is the responsibility of every Latvian citizen. But there is also a reasonable idea behind it, because, like I said, historically, this defense concept grown from the situation when smaller nations should defend themselves against stronger aggressors. And in order to be able to do it, it meant that all society should stand up against aggressor, and this way it gave a chances to increase the cost of an attack. And winter war in Finland is one of the examples. And another example actually is how Ukraine is resisting Russia's aggression nowadays. So that's why. So the next. So this whole of society principle means that we need to involve in national defense as large part of society as possible.
Right. And does that, because you mentioned, part of this strategy is that the defense of Latvia is up on every Latvian citizen. Does education about that start early in school? Are there programs that kind of support this? What kind of types of programming is there to involve kind of beyond the military age male in this kind of concept of civilian defense?
Yeah, historically, the way how you can involve whole society in national defense is actually compulsory military service. So one thing Latvia did after full-scale aggression against Ukraine was introduction of national defense service in 2023. Which expands the number of population acquiring basic military skills, and also earlier before that we started also national defense education. So it's since 2024 it's a mandatory subject in all Latvia's secondary schools. So this way we expand number of people being aware of what national defense means and why it is important to stand up for your country in case of military aggression. But before that, Latvia had also a very well developed voluntary system with national guards. But in those security circumstances where we shift from rules-based order to power politics, it's also important for a small nation like Latvia to be as strong as possible. So we need to have also more broadly expanded these basic military skills and willingness to defend the country among the population. Both women and men can apply also voluntarily. And when we had the first intake of conscription in this National Defense Service, at the first round, I think most of participants, most of recruits, they were actually volunteer. Then, of course, this changed gradually, but among my people, among my friends, I know young men, sons of my friends, going to voluntarily joining National Defense Service.
Yeah, I think there was probably a big spike in volunteers after the invasion. I would assume that the environment kind of has brought a sense of urgency for those skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Immediate military threat, it changes mindset, definitely, yes.
So I guess, do you think there is a possibility of direct military conflict between NATO and Russia over the next few years? Or do you think it's more likely that Russia will just continue escalating this kind of shadow campaign of microaggressions against NATO states? And then I guess just in very basic terms, in either scenario, is Latvia, in your view, prepared for this scenario?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to predict what Russia will do because, as we see, it depends how do you view? Some argue that it's pretty rational what Russia is doing. Some would say it's irrational. But anyway, I would say we are in a situation of unpredictability. Personally, my opinion is that it's better to prepare for the worst case scenario. And I would say that it's better to overreact than not to react in this case. So I would say we need to get ready. And that's why there are many steps taken by Latvia to increase our possibilities to resist aggression, including strengthening our border, including developing our military industry and doing all other things.
Someone who has been thinking about and preparing for worst-case scenarios is Linda Ozola, a current member of the Riga City Council who served as deputy mayor of Riga from 2020 to 2025. During her tenure, she helped spearhead a variety of civilian defense programs and crisis management initiatives. I spoke with Linda about how these came to be, the public response, and the challenges that lie ahead. You served as the deputy mayor of Riga for the last 5 years, 5 years that have arguably been extremely transformative, not only for Latvia, but of course, neighbors on NATO's eastern flank and northern flank. And as Europe faces growing security challenges, the importance of a robust civil defense system has really become increasingly clear, and you played a key role in developing how Riga has approached civil defense initiatives. So perhaps just to kind of set the scene here, can you tell us a little bit more about how and when kind of this investment in crisis management and bolstering civil defense really came about for Riga?
Well, yes, indeed. I think the whole of Latvia and our region in Europe. So we can talk about an era before 2022, 24th of February 2022 to be precise, and the era afterwards. So it was a really cold shower to wake up in the morning on the 24th of February back in 2022 and to realize that the world will never be the same and Europe will never be the same. And our region has changed forever in our relationship with the neighbors. So when I was a vice mayor at the time, also responsible for civil defense and security aspects in the capital city of Latvia, I had really a very huge motivation to invest in crisis management, in proper, robust crisis management of the capital city. Because if these things are in order, the everyday services for our citizens are of higher quality. That's the way it is. If you invest in being able to tackle all emergency situations, your everyday routines are smoother, and the citizens who pay their taxes and receive services, they feel it at the end of the day. So 2022 gave us a window of opportunity to get easy political support to dedicate real money, financial investment in crisis management, in preparedness, resilience issues, both infrastructure and some soft measures. It was very easy to take the decisions politically. Up until the February 2022, it was much more difficult to persuade your political colleagues that we should allocate additional funding and resources in crisis management. And we didn't hesitate a single day to do it, to take the decisions and go on with establishing really a professional team of experts for the capital city. I think we had better experts. In the very beginning, we had really a better team of experts in the capital city as compared to the resources that our national government had. But for me at the time, I wasn't thinking that we are a municipality and that we should be expecting now some instructions from the government as to what we should do. There were many municipalities in Latvia who did nothing and they were expecting. And in a way, in this hierarchical way that the public sector is built, that's right. I mean, the government has to think about all the levels and give some guidance as to how build civil defense systems also on the municipal level. But we didn't have time. I was really very well aware we didn't have time. We immediately, actually, after the war broke out in Ukraine, we immediately started preparing for accepting Ukrainian refugees on mass scale. An experience that my country didn't have at all. So, of course, we have some third country nationals crossing our borders, and we have some procedures and routines for that. But then we speak about single people, we speak about tens of people, but we don't speak about refugees arriving to Latvia on mass scale. And we didn't have really plans in order for what are the procedures, what we do, how we organize it. Again, that was absolutely learning by doing in our case. With very experienced colleagues on expert level at the municipality, Riga took up also the lead on organizing the acceptance of Ukrainian refugees, because the natural thing is that when they cross internal EU borders, that the first place most of them arrive is the capital city. So how to organize these acceptance points. And this experience of Ukrainian refugees arriving in Riga and organizing all the processes was also forming the basis as how we organize crisis management system and civil defense system professionally in the capital city. Using all windows of opportunity, that shouldn't be missed.
So would you say, because I mean, you mentioned after February 24th, 2022, there was a window of opportunity for political support for some of these initiatives. Would you say that it was more of a bottom-up approach, that the public, because of the changing threat perception, the security situation pretty much overnight, was it fueled by public demand for these initiatives, or was it more from the top down that it was a political decision that was supported because of the changing security, or maybe some combination kind of both?
I think it is a combination of both. But if you look from the bottom-up point of view, of course, when the war broke out, average people, they were very critical as to why civil defense or the preparedness had been neglected all the years prior to 2022.
Right.
But in this prior period, there was no demand from broader society that there should be investments, for example, in maintaining shelter infrastructure. There were no demand for that whatsoever. So, society is changing their opinions also very quickly, reacting to outside conditions. So, but of course, immediately after the war broke out, the demand was very, very high also in general public, and all the support. And it has been so since. Like, we are in 2025, our government is now actively working, and the parliament, on the budget for next year. And there's no discussion also in the society among the majority of people about increasing defense spending. Full support for that. We hope that next year, 2026, there will be 4.9% of GDP allocated for defense expenditure. And there is no criticism for that. Of course, you might have some radicals, some individual people criticizing that, but there is a very broad public support for that. Mm-hmm.
Just because you mentioned the topic of shelters, I think that's such a great example of bringing together a couple different themes of civil defense, communicating to the public about where things are, developing that infrastructure. So can you perhaps, since you were leading, I believe, this initiative on mapping shelters, communicating where there are, can you describe this initiative more for our listeners, and maybe over the past few years, what has been the public reaction to that initiative?
Also, that the listeners understand also, we inherited a network of an infrastructure of public shelters when the Soviet Union collapsed. There were minimum maintenance done up until 2008. And then in 2008, shelters, like bomb shelters, they were deleted from our national regulation altogether. So no definition, even not a single definition in the law, what a shelter is. And if we should have, not to talk about that we would need them. So there's no definition. We don't have it at all. So, and it was also immediately after the war broke out in Ukraine that I raised openly and publicly this subject. Of course, there was a lot of criticism immediately. So where are they? Why haven't you maintained them? So are you? If you raise an initiative, you immediately become responsible for that. But there was nobody to blame. I mean, if there is no obligation to maintain such an infrastructure, which is expensive, and Finland has talked about that, a lot about that, there's also been discussion about if they need to finance this excellent, I would say, network of shelters that their country has. And they have even assessed if maybe they should reduce the criteria, the quality criteria, or the financing for that. Not anymore, but still this discussion was there. So we didn't spend a single euro on this infrastructure before. Yes, in the beginning, in the public sector, of course, I met certain resistance because it requires a lot of money. That's huge infrastructure, and it's renovation, maintenance, and development of new infrastructure. It requires a lot of financing, but we have managed to get it also in the definitions, in the national regulation, and also an obligatory requirement for public buildings, if they are erected from anew, so they have to have shelters in them. And of course, we have managed to have some co-financing programs also for private owners so that they can invest in getting their properties in order. But it isn't easy. It never is in the very beginning. If you start something from scratch and then you have this dual reaction, we should have had it, but it's not there. We needed it yesterday suddenly because there is war at our doorstep,
Right.
and where to get the money and then the time. I mean, building and construction requires time. But in Riga, we have looked into several initiatives also, and intensively learned from Finnish, Ukrainian and Israeli experiences in this area. And then the resilience, as we see, this investment in hard infrastructure, shelters and material reserves. That's one side of the coin. And the other thing that we've been working on very systematically these recent years is investing in the resilience of people's mind and their preparedness and readiness for emergency situations. I remember that after the war broke out, we had to approve civil defense plan for Riga as the capital city. And we were the first municipality or the first public institution to include very concrete suggestions for how people should behave in a case of military aggression in the country. And I remember we had some national institutions who asked, do you really want to talk about military threat and what people should do in such a case? And I remember that it was us at the Riga city and representatives of the National Armed Forces, the two institutions, and we said, people are even more worried if we don't speak about the obvious threat. I mean, everybody's watching television, everybody understands what's going on, and what they want to see is that the public sector is also preparing for it. So not to talk about that is even more worrying than to really come up with some suggestions and advice for people and do it openly in a public document, in a very transparent form where experts talk about that. We have for years, it is after 2014, after Crimea was annexed by Russia, that we have talked about this preparedness kit or preparedness bag for 72 hours. So this is something I'm sure every Latvian has heard about. Not everybody has done the homework, maybe, but everybody has heard about that. But what people want to see is that if they do it on the individual level, they want to see that the public sector, the national level, the municipal level, that they do their homework with preparedness for 72 hours. And everything, it includes in our institutions being ready, kindergartens being ready to work in a crisis, in emergency situations, hospitals being able to provide health services, and sewage companies being able to provide sewage services and clean water and all of that. So yes, people really, and what I observed, people expected open, robust, direct language from experts, from politicians, but not in all situations the decision makers were able to respond to this expectation immediately. So this is interesting that to see how decision makers, they are trying to test the mood of people, what their expectations are, what the demand are, and then respond to that. But in these crisis situations, you have to be the first. Actually, you have to be the first.
And I think to a large degree too, everything you mentioned, the success of all these programs and initiatives and planning, it relies heavily also on trust, public trust that their leaders, the public sector, all the different kind of elements of community are working together, and that everyone knows what they're doing. So in terms of, you mentioned kind of the human factor in terms of motivating citizens, informing citizens, not just about that these programs exist, but kind of, I guess, how have you experienced motivating people to even want to be informed and want to understand how all of these different programs work together? Do you feel that citizens of Riga or Latvia in general are confident about the viability of these preparedness measures? Because it's, of course, one thing to, theoretically understand, okay, like we now are investing in shelters, we now have civil defense education, but it's a very different thing to actually in that moment feel like you would know what to do.
I think it differs from person to person. I am sure that majority of the citizens of Riga have heard about the municipality's activities in the area of preparedness, resilience, educating the society. For 2 years, we've been very outgoing and vocal and organized different educational seminars remotely. You can watch them online, you can come in person. And in doing this, we have cooperated with municipal and national institutions and NGOs. So I think that is the broadest education information campaign in civil defense and preparedness that our country has had so far. And again, what we didn't wait for anybody to tell us you should do that. I mean, we just went and do it. Of course, we had questions also from journalists. Is this the right thing? Isn't there enough written information on internet? Everybody can watch, find out. But, it's never too much to talk about readiness for any kind of crisis. And every channel we used so that people hear about us as much as possible. But that's one thing what we do, and we provide best experts and the highest quality information. But then people on the other end, they have to be willing to learn and to remember. What we want, when I went to school, sometimes before exams, you put your book under the pillow and hope that you will know more when you wake up in the morning. And
right.
People would, in a way, people would like also this to happen when it comes to their readiness and knowing what to do in any crisis situation. But at least you have to be willing to hear, to click and watch or read those few advices that we have prepared. And this is a psychological aspect, actually. How to reach people's minds so that they are willing to be informed.
Right, yeah.
I didn't realize it immediately when we started our work. I realized it after some months, after a year, how to get people be willing so that there are a share of people, they're very motivated. And then there's one share, I want to know, I don't know. And then we use different channels. So how else can I reach your home and your awareness with this information? So there is co-responsibility. And of course, we have to say, and we have to learn from Israel, who start talking with kids in the kindergarten on readiness and how to help your friend if he or she falls, and you have to bring her, to the doctor. So, and they practice these things in a kindergarten. So that's, of course, a different kind of mentality that you teach children from very early age. So still a way to go. We have school subjects on national defense included in the school programs now, not for small children, for slightly bigger teenagers, but nevertheless, step by step, we're going into that direction. And one thing you mentioned was about this trust, and that is such a cornerstone of readiness, resilience, preparedness, and trust in all directions. So from national, municipal, from the public sector to trust our people, then to trust our companies, the businesses, because we will depend on them as well. And we will depend on NGOs in a crisis situation. We depend on them in our daily work, where we delegate different services and they provide it for the citizens in our name. But we will depend on them in crisis situations as well. What is a challenge that I observe in Latvia, and I'm sure we are not any kind of exception in the world, is how to involve all these partners, because we are interdependent, in planning for emergencies and training for crisis. Sometimes we feel that our national government is not involving municipalities enough in planning for emergencies or different kind of things. But we are all part of a public sector, so we are actually in the same team in a way, just the different levels of public sector. Not to talk about the businesses, the private sector, or NGOs. So we have some issues in our hierarchical structure. So how now to learn trust also more other structures in our society? But most probably learning only by doing.
How do you assess Latvia's 21 years now in NATO overall? And you kind of mentioned what it meant then, but what does it mean now? And perhaps in what areas do you feel like Latvia has really stood out as a leader in the context of NATO?
Well, we were members of NATO for 21 years already, so this is more than 13 years since we gained independence and we joined NATO. So basically, most of the time that we're independent again, we've been members of NATO, and it matters a lot, as NATO is the backbone of Latvia's defense. As if there is no NATO, we have big problems. NATO enjoys quite high support among Latvia's population, and it is indeed the backbone of Latvia's defense, as mentioned previously. So we're a small nation. The armed forces, they have many spaces for progress. So they have no medium range and obviously also no long range air defense systems. Have no fighter jets. We have only 3 helicopters, Black Hawks, American ones, obviously. The fleet is rather small. We have mostly patrol vessels and minesweepers. And Latvia has done a lot, obviously, during the past decade. But with all that, we are still small and vulnerable. So that's why NATO is indeed very important for Latvia's defense.
And as you mentioned, like sometimes, obviously, it's harder for America as a huge country, very diverse, very geographically spread out. And sometimes, it's understandable that conflicts on the other side of the big, beautiful ocean are kind of not in everyone's minds. But I guess, what would you like Americans to understand about Latvia's role in transatlantic security as a whole, and why preserving and being active in alliances like NATO is so important for allies on both sides of the ocean?
Yeah, generally, I will start with the fact that NATO is one of the institutions that Latvian society trust, that the level of trust to NATO is high. And it happened at the same time when we entered also the European Union. So it was, basically, it was very, in a way, apart from security matters, it was also a symbolic act that we really have joined the community of Western democratic countries, and that we belong through them. Because, what is the West? One way of how we define it, it's NATO member states and EU member states. It's one way of defining Western values and this community of countries. So we joined it. And at the end of the day, throughout the way how Russia's relations with the West has deteriorated over time, so obviously this NATO security umbrella has protected us, obviously.
We had to learn, in the first decade, what it means to be a NATO member country. Months later, we joined also the EU. Joining the NATO was also a promise that we will be accepted in the European Union. So, of course, the first years you learn, like in school, you learn what it means, what others expect from you, and then you realize that you have your responsibility also to contribute. But from the very beginning, and I think even prior to joining NATO, we have been very active in participating in all the international operations and missions. Then one marking point in our NATO story is 2014. when Crimea was annexed. And everybody started to realize the NATO will have a renewed role in the 21st century. I'm very proud that Latvia is one of the initiators for NATO Center of Excellence for Strategic Communication, something that we talked about long before everybody now realizes that Russia is an aggressor. We talked about that many, many years before. And NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence is hosted in Riga. And there are many, many more countries that have joined now, and the United States of America amongst them. We're happy to welcome. So now, when we speak about disinformation or hybrid threats, oh, that's a natural thing. But we needed a decade to persuade our allies that, yes, hybrid threats are real. And we were not, the Baltic countries and Poland, we were not taken seriously on this for so many years. So we're really happy that we have managed to put that on the table. I think our membership in NATO, we started like children, then we went through the adolescence, and now we are like adults and equal partners, contributing really fully. If we look also that I mentioned already about the defense spending, so what we aim for in our budget 2026, which is in our parliament right now, is 4.9% of our GDP. So really trying to reach 5%, and we want to be among the first countries who do that. Also to prove our dedication and to the NATO, and by that, of course, inviting other countries to treat NATO as seriously, because it is these threats that Russia poses on the eastern flank of the NATO is a threat not only to the Baltic countries or Finland, but to the whole of Western civilization. So no doubt about that at all.
So I guess my last question, which is my favorite question because this is geared towards an American audience, is what would you like Americans to understand about Latvia's role in transatlantic security, and why continuing to invest and support alliances like NATO is still so important till this day?
Yeah, very good question. I need to think about it a little bit.
Take your time.
but indeed we are small nations. We are very committed nations to democratic values and to belonging to the West. Yeah, and we understand Russia very well. We have experienced. We know what it means. We have our competence. Yeah, and being attacked by Russia is very dangerous. And we strongly believe that our NATO membership can deal with this issue, and that we can have the sovereignty and to protect our sovereignty and national identity in the long term. That's what's very important for us. But also I would like to add, that the Soviet experience was like we were occupied, and then there was this division line between NATO and Warsaw Pact countries. But nowadays, I think there is maybe a temptation to think that, these are small states, it's not so important. But what the Western audiences, and also particularly American audiences, have to understand that it will not be just one chunk that Russia would take away from NATO. It will go like a cancer further. So I think it's very essential, as NATO defined, so it's very essential to defend every inch of NATO territory, wherever it is.
Well, it's better to have more friends than less friends, and alliances about mutual benefits. Latvian soldiers have served both in Afghanistan and Iraq. Several Latvian soldiers have lost their lives and also have received injuries. So Latvia was there for the United States when the Americans asked for Latvia's involvement in those missions and others. Also, currently Latvian soldiers serve in missions operations around the globe. Kosovo currently is the biggest, but Latvian soldiers also in Lebanon. Some also in Iraq and other places. So this is one point. And obviously, we are happy to help Americans whenever again. And I think also Latvian society is generally sympathetic about Americans and America. And this is not the case in many other countries around the globe. So in general, it's good that you have other countries and societies that have positive views of your country.
Thank you again to Maris, Yeva, and Linda for taking the time to share their insights with us about Latvia's role on NATO's northern flank. Now, this is just a snippet of our conversations. The full interviews and transcripts with all of our guests will be available on the Ties That Bind Substack, so make sure to subscribe at the link in the show notes to get those into your inbox as soon as they become available. The Ties That Bind is a project of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, generously supported by the NATO Public Diplomacy Division. For more information about this and other initiatives, please visit us at fpi.org. This episode was produced by Natalia Kapitnik with a special thanks to Sarah Helena Marapoti and Leo Pedro for production assistance and Katie Janner for editing. Join us next month for a deep dive on Finland. Until next time.